My name is Melissa Booth, and my primary function with the Palm Beach TPA is that of Public Relations Manager, but my subtitle is ADA and Title VI Coordinator for the Palm Beach TPA. So what we're here to do is to help all of us have an opportunity to come into compliance, and you all being in compliance helps the TPA be in compliance. And Dean will tell us all about those regulations today.
Well, welcome to West Palm Beach. Couple of little introduction things about myself. My name is Dean Perkins. I'm an architect with the Florida Department of Transportation. I've been with the Florida DOT for a little over 30 years. I'm also the statewide ADA coordinator for Florida DOT, which I've been in that position for almost 27 years. I'm down here in West Palm Beach avoiding the hurricane in Tallahassee, where I come from. I'm from DOT at headquarters, so my drive home this afternoon will be quite interesting. Find out where there might be power and open roads and stuff like that. So anyway, welcome. I've been invited to come down here by the TPA to talk to you about ADA and transition plans. In your entities, in your locality, do you know if you have an ADA transition plan? Anyone want to raise your hand? 2 or 3 or 4 of you. Anyone know what an ADA transition plan is? Well, that's hopefully what we're here today to talk about, is that we're going to share a little bit about the responsibilities of state and local government agents under Title II of the ADA. We're going to give you a little bit of a background of the ADA and other civil rights laws. Title II of the ADA is what covers our state and local government services, programs, and activities. So anything we say or do as a state or local government agency, we have Title II responsibilities under the ADA. I've been doing a lot of training providing the technical issues, sidewalks and streets and curb ramps, stuff like that. This is more administrative, the higher level stuff that we'll talk about today. So we'll talk about how to conduct self-evaluations and ADA transition plans, and we'll talk about the elements of, the components of, because it's multiple steps. It's not just one big long report that somebody sits down at a desk and starts thinking about and writing. It's something you have to start to put together and there's a few steps, and we'll talk about what those steps are. We'll give you the steps. We'll talk about the details of the steps, who wants to be involved, who should be involved, and then things to look out for, because as you're out there looking at your pedestrian environment, whether it be in a building or on the roadside or on a site, there's things that you might want to be careful about and pay attention and look for. So we'll talk about what those are. A little bit of background of the ADA. The ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, is a civil rights law. It sort of is in disguise as a building code because a lot of the technical stuff and the standards and regulations, but it is actually a civil rights law. It's based on the original 1964 Civil Rights Act, which gave protection to people from discrimination based on their race, their color, their country of origin. Those are the original first 3 protected classes. The Architectural Barriers Act in 1968 was the first federal law to start requiring access to people with disabilities, or non-discrimination against people with disabilities, in federal buildings, only owned and operated by federal buildings. In 1973, the Rehabilitation Act was enacted. Section 504 was enacted, talking about providing access or prohibiting discrimination for people with disabilities in federal programs. Is anyone sure what a federal program? Know what a federal program is? If you've accepted any federal funds at all, $1 of federal funds, you are a federal program. Do your cities and counties, municipalities, and villages accept federal funds to do any of your projects? Guess what? You're a federal program. Lucky you. Now, think about it. We started requiring provide access to people with disabilities in the early 70s. When do you think did we do that? Actually, we sort of did. When did you start seeing curb ramps on the roadside? Mid to late 70s, right? That's probably in response to the Rehab Act. Civil Rights Act, Reauthorization Act in 1987 was issued to refresh the 504 responsibilities, because it had been going through the years, over the few years, cities and counties saying, well, my police department has never accepted any federal funds. Only the education department, or only the housing department, or only the public works has accepted federal funds. So my police department doesn't have to comply with any of this stuff. Guess what? If any of your divisions or departments accepts federal funds, all of your departments and divisions are responsible to providing access to people with disabilities under the Rehabilitation Act and the Reauthorization Act. 1990, the ADA came out. was issued, was published and signed into law in July 1990, excuse me. The year later, the regulations and the standards were issued, July of 1991, under the Department of Justice responsibilities and also under Department of Transportation. So there's two sets of regulations that govern what we do. DOJ looks at your buildings and sites. Department of Transportation looks at your public rights of way and your other transportation facilities like bus stations and bus stops and stuff like that. 6 months later, both regulations became enacted became effective, and we got the new standards that are in place. So basically, anything you say or do, any service or program you provide as of January 26, 1992, and any facility you build or modify or renovate as of January 26, 1990, had to meet the criteria in the regulations and the standards. 1994, they did some minor editorial changes to the standards, which really didn't affect the impact of them, but about 10 years after that, after some additional research by the U.S. Access Board, they republished new sets of guidelines. The Access Board, U.S. Access Board, issued some new guidelines in 2004 to say we need to refresh these standards because we're learning. We've got new research about people with disabilities. We've got new technologies that are coming out. Between 91 and 94, the internet, that was one of the biggest things that started coming up. Telecommunications. Cell phones were getting to be hot stuff because prior to then, cell phones were the big bags, with the cord that weighed about 10 pounds to carry around. You didn't clip one of those on your belt or hide it in your back pocket. So there's new technologies and new research has been going on to find out about what the needs of people with disabilities and the different types. We're learning about the different types of disabilities. In 2005, the U.S. Access Board issued some public right-of-way guidelines. Wait a minute. That sounds really good for us, especially if we're in the Public Works office where we deal with streets and roads all the time, because the ADA standards and the guidelines in 2004 dealt primarily with sites and buildings. Didn't really talk about stuff like you might find out on the right-of-way, which might be different. We talk about bathrooms and toilets and lavatories and halls and stuff like that in office buildings, but we don't talk much about street crossings or pedestrian detectors or something like that. So they came up with some new sets of guidelines for public rights-of-way facilities. A year after that, U.S. Department of Transportation said, those 2004 standards are really good. Let's go ahead and adopt them for our transportation facilities, the ones that the sole purpose for of that facility or that site is to provide a transportation service. We're talking bus stations, train stations, bus stops, places like that, not necessarily office buildings. In 2011, the U.S. Access Board tried to issue the notice of proposal rulemaking for the update and refresh of the PROAG, the Public Right-of-Way Accessibility Guidelines. But that never really got through because not too many years after that we have a change of administration, and so the regulatory process came to a sort of a screeching halt. We've got a new regulation right now, new executive order right now, that if a federal agency wants to publish one new regulation, they have to abolish 2 old regulations. So we got the Department of Justice and Department of Transportation and other agencies trying to figure out, okay, if we want to bring in PROAG and make it a standard, we have to figure out which other 2 regulations we don't want to keep, we have to get rid of. And they haven't decided yet, so I'm not expecting anything happening anytime new with PROAG. Even though Federal Highways Administrations are recommending the use of PROAG in the use of their, in the design and implementation of their facilities, of transportation facilities. A couple of language, gets a little background stuff. Section 504 of the Rehab Act 1973, no otherwise qualified with an individual with a disability shall be excluded from participation of any program or activity for receiving federal funds, federal financial assistance. The ADA, do you see anything about money in there? Federal financial assistance? Basically, if you're a state or local government agency, you have to comply even if you've never accepted federal funds, because it is a civil rights law. Application, a little bit of a further background. The original 1964 Civil Rights Act, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act talked about non-discrimination based on race, color, national origin, right? 73, the Rehab Act, Section 504 talked about disabilities, non-discrimination for disabilities if you receive federal funds. The ADA was sort of in the middle. It focuses on disabilities, but no federal funds are involved. So we don't have to worry about Whether we comply with the ADA, we must comply with the ADA. We are responsible to comply under Title II as a state or local government agency. It has been said that a public sidewalk along a roadway is a public service. A lot of cities and counties disputed that. Wait a minute, that's a facility. I can touch it. I can feel it. It's not a facility. It's not a service. It's a facility. But then courts and even the federal government has said, well, wait a minute. There's no law in the country right now that says you have to build a sidewalk. There's a lot of guidelines where you should build sidewalks and recommendations where, like in government buildings and schools and hospitals and stuff like that. But there's no law that says you have to build a sidewalk. So in most cases, when we build a sidewalk, we built it because we think it's providing a service to our public. In a lot of cases, it's mostly a safety issue. We want to get the pedestrians out of the streets, right? So they're not getting run over. So if we do build a sidewalk, we must make sure that we build it to meeting the ADA. We had a few cases where, like the city of Sacramento in 2002, they got sidewalks all over the place. They put them all over the place, but they're all broken up. There were curb ramps were bad. They were cracked. They were damaged. There were missing spots. And someone sued and said, wait a minute, you should be maintaining these sidewalks because they're a public service. And the city said, no, they're a facility. Well, the court said, no, you're City of Sacramento, you're wrong. It is a facility. These items are facilities. You must maintain them and repair them and upgrade them and make sure they meet the ADA criteria. And oh, by the way, for the next 30 years, you must spend 20% of your transportation budget doing sidewalk work. Imagine taking your entire transportation budget out of your city and lopping the top 20% right off of it. What's that going to do to your road resurfacing and repairs and widenings and stuff like that? City of Saline in is that Kansas? Or Saline, Missouri, somewhere. Anyway, they had a very similar criteria, same thing. Here's where the big numbers come in. Chicago, $50 million they have to spend in curb ramp improvements over the next 20 years. That's $2.5 million a year, just on curb ramps. Caltrans, City of Los Angeles, must spend $4 million a year for the next 25 years on sidewalks and curb ramps. Sacramento, there's a 20% over the 30 years. That's the reminder of that. I don't want to be having a judge telling me how to spend my money, my public works money. I want to be able to make those decisions myself, and that's part of what the transition planning process is all about, is helping you decide how and when and where you're going to spend your resources.
Question.
Yes?
Are we presently, since you said the 2011 was not passed, are we still under the 2006?
We are still under the 2006 ADA standards, but the ADA standards are silent on most things within the roadway. They talk about sidewalks and they talk about curb ramp, but they don't talk about street crossings. They don't talk about pedestrian signals and other things like that we might find only in the public right-of-way. So the 2006 standards, which are still in effect, we can be sued for not complying with 2006. There are some issues in the 2006 standards that are not addressed that we might find in the public right-of-way. And that's where the U.S. Department of Transportation and Federal Highways Administration says where the standards don't talk about something and PROAG does, use the PROAG because that's the best guidance. It's the best recommendation for it. They originally called it a best practice, and they're not really calling it equivalent facilitation because if there's nothing in the standards, we can't provide something equivalent if there's nothing already there. This is new information that is directed specifically towards facilities we'd find only in the public right-of-way. So, under Title II of the ADA, 28 CFR Part 35, there's this nice long requirement that says you must available to participants, beneficiaries, and other interested parties information regarding the provisions of this part, which is the requirement to provide a notice. Basically, I'm going to cut to the chase. Basically, we will not discriminate against people based on their disabilities. That whole long paragraph is lawyerese for we won't discriminate. Does that sound reasonable? That's Title II. That is one of the first basic things. Requirements is we have to provide a notice. How do we let people know about that notice? Bulletin boards in public buildings, in the library, City Hall, Town Hall, whatever, County Courthouse, on the website. Public notices on your government access channel maybe, so places to put it in multiple places. Don't just okay, we got a sign in the courthouse, we're good. No, we need to have it in multiple places so people can actually find it. Public has published a notice. In addition, if you have 50 or more employees, do we have any local agency here that has fewer than 50 employees? Part-time and full-time, not contract. So you have fewer than 50 employees system-wide. Okay. This may not apply to you, but we'll talk about how close to 50 are. Never mind. If you have 50 or more employees, you're required to designate a responsible employee. We call that person an ADA coordinator. You're also required to adopt a grievance procedure that talks about discrimination against people with disabilities. Not just your Title VI or your Title VII grievance procedure, Title VI for the public, Title VII for employees, but also the ADA criteria that we will not discriminate against someone. And if someone thinks they've been discriminated, we have a process for they can complain. So we have to have a grievance procedure. And then we're also supposed to adopt a transition plan, conduct a self-evaluate, and then adopt a transition plan, develop a transition plan. Guess what? The regulation already talks about curb ramps way back in 1991. So it should not be a surprise if someone says, well, wait a minute, why do I have to go look at curb ramps? Well, it was there at the beginning, 27 years ago.
Dean, does it have to be a plan for different park separate from the right-of-way, or is it one plan, or is it one coordinator for the whole city?
The question is whether the transition plan has to be divided by division or department, or it can be agency-wide. The ADA, the Department of Justice, the regulations do not describe at what detail and how many levels of transition plan, so that can be a city or a county decision that, okay, we want to do a system-wide one ADA plan, or one transition plan for the entire county. Or we can say, no, we got different things going on here. We got Parks and Rec, we got Public Works, we got other things. Let's go ahead and let each division do one specific to their activities and responsibilities in their facilities. So that's a local agency decision about how they implement it, how they conduct it. Yes?
Okay, you mentioned something that I didn't want to do, but we all accepted FEMA funds,
Mm-hmm.
and those are federal funds.
Those are federal funds, FEMA funds, yes.
We accepted federal funds, like FEMA funds,
Mhm.
you still have to comply with all ADA.
You don't have to comply with the ADA, but you do have to comply with 504 back in 1973, and 504 also had a transition plan responsibility for those who accepted the federal funds. So even if you're a small agency, you may not have to conduct a transition plan under the ADA, but you should already have one conducted under 504, the earlier law. And if you don't have one, now's your chance to update it, right? That's one thing the Federal Highways Administration has been going on. I don't know if you're aware, we come around the state, the Florida Division Federal Highways Administration and Florida Department of Transportation have been traveling around the state these last few years, visiting local agencies, doing Title VI reviews and ADA reviews. We call them SCATs, sub-recipient compliance assessment team evaluations, where we will come and visit you and talk to you about your Title VI activities, and talk to you about your ADA type activities, and ask for your transition plan, and ask for your Title VI, your notices and your grievance procedures, and see what you're doing. And that's something that we are required to do as a state transportation agency, because Federal Highways Administration is saying, so those people who are using federal funds, we want the states to monitor how those funds are being used and implemented. So that's why we've got this new called local agency program, where we come down and visit, a few districts or a few agencies each year, and talk to them. And we don't consider it like an audit, where We come down and, oh, we're the big bad, accountants, and we're going to say, oh, sorry, you're not spending enough money, or sorry, you don't have this, so we're going to slap your hand. We do not do that. We come down and find out where you might have some deficiencies, you might have some needs or need some help, and we provide it to you. We give you the resources, we give you the help, we will hold your hand if need be. Because we feel that's better to help you comply rather than to make you comply. We want to be the good DOT, not the bad DOT. So that's just a little bit of a side. And one of the things we will be asking for is an ADA transition plan. We would like to see it. And if you don't have one, or if we think it's maybe a little bit deficient, we will help you generate one, provide you the resources and examples on how to generate a good one. Because there's a lot of good examples out there. Some not so good ones as well. Under the ADA regulations, all public entities, including NPOs, TPOs, TPAs, are required to conduct self-evaluation of their programs and services. And where deficiencies are discovered, make necessary modifications. So the cities and the counties and the villages and the towns may have the primary responsibility for the streets and the sidewalks and the roads and stuff like that. The TPO, who may not own or operate any of the physical facilities, they have the administrative responsibilities to plan and guide and recommend, right? So they have some responsibilities. That's one thing. Since the MPOs, TPOs, whatever, the transportation planning organizations may or may not be part of the county or city government. They may be an umbrella third party, semi-private, semi-governmental entity. I'm not sure, is the Palm Beach TPA part of the Palm Beach County government, or is it a separate entity that's semi-private? Do we know? I guess
They're working on becoming completely separate.
so. But right now they're still under the umbrella of the.
They have an agreement.
Okay. So they may be treated a little bit differently, whether they're part of the government umbrella, part of within the government, or sort of a third-party outside agency. And we'll talk a little bit about what those are. But again, does the TPA have 50 or more employees? If they don't, then the TPA itself may not be required to have a transition plan. They still got to have the notice. And according to Melissa, they've got an ADA coordinator, so that's okay too. And I'd like to think they have a grievance. Just because you're not required to have it doesn't mean you can't have something. You can always do a transition. You can always have a grievance. You can always have, even if you're fewer than 50 employees, because that shows a good faith effort towards complying with the regulations and the law. So anyway, the tripping point, the trigger is 50 employees is the key thing. So there's basically a simple responsibility under 50, provide a notice. Over 50, then you get to do the grievance procedure of person and other stuff. So, Melissa, I just asked a question. Is the TPA, Palm Beach TPA, part of Palm Beach County, or is it a third-party, a separate agency?
And we are actually in the process of relocating our offices. That process will probably take 6 months or so, but actually next week our board will vote to enter a lease. So we are in the transition of separating the agreement we have with Palm Beach County, but we've always been a separate entity. We have a separate board of directors. 5 of the county commissioners sit on there, along with 15 representatives from your larger cities, and also 1 elected official from the Port of Palm Beach. So we've always been independent. Mm-hmm. We did have that agreement with the county, which is why our offices are located here and so forth, and we are actually county employees. But that is in the transition of ending.
Okay.
Hopefully the good relationship working together will.
That's good. Okay, thank you. I just learned something today. Cool.
And I should say, I apologize, I didn't mean to overlook introducing Dean, but I figured you could do a better job yourself of giving them your credentials. Thank you.
Thank you. So according to the regulation and FHWA's interpretation of the regulation, there is no distinction made between planning organizations and organizations that do more than planning. I was just talking about how the cities and counties may have responsibility for streets and roads where the TPAs might not have responsibility for them, but they help with the planning and development and stuff like that, the future work for them, but they not have responsible for the physical, environment. But you still have some transition planning responsibilities if you have 50 or more employees, especially. Or if you're within the umbrella of the government agency. then you would have to make sure. So, if your MPO, your TPO, TPA, is under the government, part of the government, the TPA can't say we have an ADA transition plan unless the government entity has an ADA transition plan. So that you're a little bit different, but if you're separate, from the city or county, you might have your own separate ADA transition plan and an ADA coordinator and other responsibilities. Independent, here we go, talk about independent, must still be able to demonstrate that facilities and programs are accessible to and otherwise advise the other entities. Smaller entities that lack any jurisdiction, they're not expected to have public right-of-way transition plans. You might have a facilities transition plan. If you lease a property or if you own property, your transition plan applies to that, what you actually have physical control over. And of course, the TPA is resources for planning, future planning of other development, right? They may be, the TPA has resources available to the cities or the counties that they can provide and help you develop your transition plan. Maybe they don't have responsibility to develop an independent one on their own, but they can have the resources possibly to help you develop yours. Sharing data, they do the research, right? You know what's coming up. Identifying partners. And then reporting on innovative programs that cost-effective tools that might assist. I'm trying not to read the screens, but I haven't done this presentation too many times. Okay, under Title II. We talked about this earlier. This is sort of a little summary slide, then we'll go into more detail. Generator responsible employee, we generally call them the ADA coordinator. Adopt a grievance procedure, multiple locations posted. Conduct a self-evaluation of your programs and services, and then a transition plan of your physical facilities. Because the programs and services, like what policies and procedures do you use and what documents do you produce and share with the public, you're supposed to go through those guys and make sure there's no discriminatory language or inadvertent discrimination. Maybe we're not intending to discriminate against a group of people, but because just the nature of the way we do business, we might be inadvertently, excusing them or eliminating them from being able to participate in that part of the business. So we want to go through what we do, our policies and procedures, and make sure we're okay. And then the transition plan is basically the physical environment. The doorways, the bathrooms in a building, in the office, in the rooms, and the lavatories and the cafeteria and all the things that people see and touch in a building or on a site, in the parking spaces on the parking lot, the sidewalks on the parking lot. And then also the transition plan for public rights of way would include the sidewalks and the curb ramps and the crossings along the street edge. So the duties of an ADA coordinator. Supposed to know some stuff about the ADA, right? Should not be the guy late to the meeting said, oh, by the way, you just got yourself appointed the ADA coordinator, start teaching next week. That's not going to happen. Ensure that staff and general public know how to contact the department's ADA coordinator. Does everybody in this room know who their agency ADA coordinator is? That is one of the first things you need to find out when you leave this room. If you don't already know, go ask, who is our agency's ADA coordinator? That's important to know because you might get a complaint. Who do I share it with? Right? Serve as the primary resource for ADA information. So that person needs to start learning about the ADA if they don't already know. That was one reason I got this job as the ADA coordinator in January 1992 because I'd already heard about the law back in 1990. And I was starting to do a little research and find out I'm an architect. We'd have lots and lots of buildings. We need to make sure that people can get into those buildings. What does that mean? Well, how do we do that? Well, get rid of the little 4-inch step at the front door of every building, right? To keep the water out. Now you got to do flush transitions and exterior business. You got to get your parking lot spaces right. You got to get your bathrooms right. Water fountains, believe it or not, telephones. So it was sort of an interesting new process for me to learning a new way to do buildings, design buildings. The ADA coordinator is supposed to help coordinate, if not even to fully develop, the grievance procedure. Work with HR because there may be some complaints in-house as well as complaints out of house. It can be the same procedure. It works for Title VI, ADA, as well as Title VII. start some training, folks. This is the new regulation. Well, it was 25, 27 years ago. But do some training so people will know that everyone in the agency has some responsibility, even if there's something that's only to know who the ADA coordinators and share, you know. But yes, sir.
I just have a quick question. So when you deal with the different agencies across Florida, who do you see as the coordinator? I mean, typically.
When we travel around the state of Florida talking to cities and counties, and with our reviews, one of the first things we do some remote communications, telephones and emails, and say, we would like to come visit you this and such a date, 2 or 3 or 4 months out. These are the people we would like to talk to by title, not by name. You know, maybe the city attorney or whatever. But usually we'll start with the ADA coordinator, Title VI coordinator, and they will provide to us who that person is. I don't know your name and your position, your title in what city. I don't know you are, or if you are the ADA coordinator. We ask the entity, the agency, who is their ADA coordinator. We need to talk with them. And if they say we don't have one, we'll say we'll find one. Or we will help them provide the resources so they can help someone learn how to be in that position. Again, schedule training sessions and meeting sessions. Coordinate the training for personnel within the agency. I do training in-house for our staff on how to comply with the ADA. We also do training for our district staff, for our local agency staff. Local agencies, we do lab training, local agency program training. We've trained our design consultants. They're providing services to us. We want to make sure that they are providing accessible services to us. We train contractors who are building on the roadside. So when they go out and build something, they build it correctly, and they know the reasons why. And then we also train our inspectors, so that when the contractor doesn't get it quite right, the inspector knows to fix it. You know, this is what you need to massage that a little bit and make it a little bit better. So it's not just training people in-house. You train everybody who you work with and who works with and for you, so that everyone is aware. We're all singing from the same sheet of paper, basically. We're all in this together. We all have responsibilities to comply. And it's because the consultants, the designers, and the contractors are doing work on our behalf, they are responsible to meet the Title II criteria just like we are, because we cannot contract away our responsibilities. We can't say, here, contractor, it's yours, go do what you want, and we'll get it later. We can't do that. We have to let them know, and we have to know that what they do on our behalf has to be compliant when we accept it. Promote the inclusion of people with disabilities. One of the things that's the best part of the whole self-evaluation and transition plan process is invite people from the community to help you do it. They might know more about what you need to know than you know. They can help you learn. So if you're going out doing a self-evaluation of your policy and procedures, maybe invite an employee or someone who's an advocate nearby who can help you know what to look for. You know, what language do you look for? What process and procedures might you need to massage just a little bit so they're not discriminatory. The transition plan is perfect to invite someone. You're out walking the sidewalk, looking at curb ramps and sidewalks and crossings. Have someone who is blind on the team. Have someone who uses a wheelchair on the team. They will be glad to share what they see and find for you and share with you. That's one of the best things that we did when we did our transition plans back in the 90s, is that on every one of our teams, we had at least one person with a disability on the team. And not only because they know what to do, but our folks learned faster what to look for. One of the best classes I ever taught was a few years ago. There was a blind person from the Division of Blind Services in the room. He was blind since a young man. Had his dog, had his white cane. I learned so much from him as a trainer, as a speaker, as an ADA coordinator in that 1 2-hour session that I had learned many years before. He was willing to share his life experiences as a person with no vision, truly no vision. And he also helped me massage the presentation, because lots of photographs and lots of text, That was one class I literally had to read the text on the screen so he could get it, and also describe the diagrams and the photographs so he could understand what everybody else was seeing. But so that was a good learning experience for me, as well as a good learning experience for the audience, for the participants. This is who we're working for. This is who benefits from what we're doing. Yes?
The City of Boynton Beach works with Lighthouse for the Blind in the Palm Beaches. So if anybody needs assistance in that kind of area, contact Lighthouse for the Blind. They're
Right.
wonderful. And also Coalition for Independent Living Options.
Right.
For people with
Those are two great resources, the Lighthouse for the Blind, as well as the Centers for Independent Living. All over the state, every community, just about every community has an agency. If you don't know who your CIL folks are, there's the Florida Independent Living Centers, group in Tallahassee. They can help you find FILC, in Florida Independent Living Centers. Yeah, I've worked with him occasionally. In fact, I went to him and said, "Hey, well, how can we do to make your folks' lives better?" So, this is there are resources out there. You just need to sort of start hunting and pecking around for them. Thank you. Samples of grievance procedures and notices are available online. Just change the name to protect the innocent at the ADA.gov PC Toolkit, and we'll give you a link to it later. I'll show you a sample of it later. These are just some samples. These are like boilerplate documents. It's a one-page. It's not real fancy words, not real fancy. It's just, and you can literally change the name. Put your logo, agency headline up there, and the city of or the county of. There's your notice. Post it on the public buildings. Post it, broadcast it online, whatever. Same thing with a grievance procedure, same type thing. The details about the grievance procedure is you will contact Dean Perkins, ADA coordinator at Florida DOT. You won't say contact the HR office, or you won't say contact Public Works director. You have to provide a name, the specific contact name, so people who know who, and that's actually spelled out in the regulation. So the name, address, phone number, email address, whatever. And then probably also include the 711, right?
Yes.
So for the Florida relay service. So someone who's deaf can call someone who can talk, and they work through the translator at the Florida relay service. Self-evaluations. Any questions so far? We're okay? Self-evaluations. Evaluate the agency's current services, policies, practices that potentially limit access for people with disabilities to the public services, and then make necessary revisions and modifications if you find them. That's where you go into your documents. This is not looking at doors and halls and bathrooms. This is actually looking at the stuff that's hiding in the library somewhere, or on a shelf, or on the computer banks, right, on the server. Provide an opportunity for people to include disabilities in the self-evaluating process. Let them look at your stuff and submit comments. Publish it. It's public record anyway. Ask them to look at it and give them a site to go look for it. And say, hey, we'd like you to take a quick look at this. Does it look okay to you? Is there something you think we should change? And then once you have completed the process, then you make your self-evaluations available for public inspection, which means you can pick up the phone and say, I'd like to see your self-evaluation of your Public Works Department or of your HR department, whatever. And you should be able to say, okay, we got that. Here you can, this is like a public records request, right? You process it like a public records request. And then what you do is you share it with them. You can say, this is what it looked like before. This is what we changed, or this is what it looked like before, and it was perfectly good. We didn't have to change anything. But this is the new process, possibly, if we actually did make some changes. There are 4 primary steps to ADA transition plans, and we'll start going into the details of these. They shall identify existing obstacles, physical obstacles, that limit access for people with disabilities to services, programs, and activities, services, policies, procedures, and facilities. Because we're looking at the physical environment now. We're looking at the doors and the bathrooms and the street crossings and the curb ramps and the sidewalks. This is where you get out the tools, cameras and tapes and stuff like that. When you find deficiencies, you describe in detail how you're going to correct them. The curb ramp's too steep. The doorway is too narrow. The bathroom doesn't provide access for a wheelchair user. How are you going to make those corrections? Maybe that doorway's too narrow, but that one okay, so you direct people to that door. Maybe you don't have to do anything to this door, but your modification may be direct people to the accessible entrance, the usable one. Maybe you got stairs up the front door, but you got a ramp around the side. Maybe it's expensive to build another ramp up front of your building, but you can put a sign at the front saying accessible entrance around the side. That's okay. Or you may have to widen a doorway or renovate a bathroom to make sure there's a bathroom stall for the wheelchair user can use.
Question.
Yes.
Your comment confused me a little bit. I thought that the regulations stipulated that accessibility has to be the same as someone who is not handicapped. So if it's a front door accessible, the front door has to be the accessible route.
The question is, does the front door and the accessible entrance have to be the same thing as the front door? It has to be approximately the same. Now you don't want to reroute some around to the back side of the building, a quarter mile around this large building. If you can modify the front door and make it accessible fairly reasonably and feasibly, please do. But if you've already got another entrance not too far away, which is already accessible, or if we made it accessible even less expensively, you are actually allowed to use, I won't say the cheapest way out, but to use the least resources in order to provide the access. Perfectly ideal. Of course, if your main entry of your building, that's where the security desk is, and that's where everybody has to come and go, unless they're an employee and they have a certain badge or security clearance, then yes, you're going to make the front door accessible. Because I know security is getting to be the bigger thing, so we're starting to limit where people can enter a building. People don't just walk in off the street anymore and just step in any door anymore, right? That might have happened 20 years ago, but not much more anymore. But so yes, it's ideally yes, it's exactly the same thing. The DOT regulation says the accessible entrance must be as close as possible to the primary entrance. It doesn't say it has to be identical to it, just has to be as close as possible. Follow the approximate same path with the same length. Specify a schedule for making these corrections that you've identified. You found your problems, you know how to fix them, now you get to schedule them. And they all got to be done the next 90 days, right? No. Schedule them over the months, years, whatever your resources allow. If you're a small community with a small area capture, your resources are going to be a lot smaller, right? Smaller tax base. So you might not be able to fix every curb ramp and every sidewalk this year or next year or within the next 5 years. Do what your resources allow. And believe it or not, as things change, you can change your transition plan. As the economy rises and falls and rises and falls and resources rise and fall, you can do more the good years, you can do less the bad years. You might have tried to plan a steady state. We're going to do 100 curb ramps every year for the next 10 years. But maybe next year, we only got to 50, but maybe next year we do 125, maybe next year we can do. So it's a flexible, it's supposed to be a living document. Once you develop this document, it's not just sitting on the shelf, right, collecting dust. Every time you do something that affects or says we've accomplished this portion of the problem, pull the document off and say, yes, check, accomplished, completed, done, yes. That way, when someone says, can I see your ADA transition plan, which is a public record, you can say, this was our plan, this is where we are, we're a little bit ahead of the plan, we're a little bit behind the plan, but this is what we've been able to accomplish. And you know what? Yes, go ahead.
Dean, I was just going to ask, since the plan is supposed to be a living plan and updated, is it acceptable if it's staff-driven and updated frequently, or does this need to be something that goes before a commission or a board to be formally adopted, have that commitment from the elected officials? Meaning you would have to do that every time you make an update, correct?
To my knowledge, can the plan be adjusted routinely by almost anybody or some responsible party? Or is it an official formal document that needs some formal approval every time you make a change to it? No. It is, now the original document may need the formal approval because you've got to apply resources. You know, you've got to apply that $1 million a year or that $100,000 a year, you know, in order to cover what you promised you need, you know, told you need to do. So you might need formal approval for that. But for the operational portion, unless there's some really huge major changes like, hey, we need an extra $100,000 because we've got so many more to do, or these things, we found out they're more expensive than we thought they were going to be. That probably may have to go back to the board. But for the everyday operational stuff, you shouldn't have to do that. That's just a pull it off the shelf. Okay, this month we did this, we're done. Let's go to the next phase.
Dean, next question, identifying existing obstacles.
Mm-hmm.
So suppose you have 500 centerline miles of road. Are you supposed to go audit every curb ramp in your city this year?
The idea,
Detail.
how detailed does the transition plan have to be, and how do you do it? Well, partly it depends on the resources you have. Are you going to try to do it with in-house folks, and they're going to take a day a week and go out and walk so many miles of sidewalk or something like that? That is a very feasible way to do something like that. But yes, ultimately you're going to have to cover the entire area of your jurisdiction and your responsibilities. It may not be this week, next week. It may be a 6 or 8 or 9 or 10 month process. It may be a year process.
I mean, you say we're going to do a quarter of the city each year to identify the facilities, or?
Hopefully, well, ideally you want to do the survey, the initial identification, pretty close in the same, pretty close together, because things change. You know, maybe you found a really good thing when you know, there, but if you went back to look at it 3 years later, it'd been run over by trucks, and now it's no longer good. So you want to try to do as much of that, identify obstacles, as pretty close in the same time sequence as possible, as resources allow. Now, you can do this with in-house, you can do it with consultants, you can do it with lots of different methods, and we'll talk about some of those a little bit later too as well. And then the key thing, who's going to make sure it happens? You know, we've had a lot of, some of our local agency reviews, we said, can we see your ADA transplant? Oh, sure, we got it. Here it is, 1993. Had to blow the dust off of it. They've not done a thing in it. Now, they plan to do, you know, fixes in 96 and 98 and 2000. Well, let's see, what did you do? Well, we never quite got around to those. Uh-oh, that's not an ADA transition plan. That's the identification, but that's not the plan, you know, the operations of the same thing itself. Yes.
After we did our self-evaluation and we had our transition plan, we took it to commission. They approved it, knowing, you know, the years that it would take to actually make that transition. But then to make sure that didn't happen, we incorporated every single project in like a 10-year capital improvement program.
Mm-hmm.
So, and those change because the economy changed.
Right.
But it's still, those projects were captured somewhere that's a regular annual document that we use for budgeting.
Right.
So it helped us avoid forgetting about it.
Yeah.
Because staff change, people come and go.
Sure. And that is a good way to operate your ADA transition plan. Roll it into your normal capital improvement plan, your normal work program plan. Don't keep it as a separate, we got to dedicate special money just for ADA stuff, and then 1 year we don't get the money, so we don't get to do it, or we forget, or like you say, people change, and someone said, well, you know, why didn't we do those sidewalks, curb ramps last year? Well, because we didn't know we had to do those. But the best thing to do it is roll everything into your standard way of doing business. You know that you got the issues, you know you got other projects coming up, blend them together. That sounds like a good plan to do it.
We just made a little notation on the ones that were related to the transition plan.
Mm-hmm.
So if they needed to be separated out at the end of the year to say, here's the things that were done or not,
Right.
and make sure they got carried over.
That sounds like a great way to do things. That sounds like that way you're getting the work done, and also you're also documenting it. Maybe not be documenting specifically in the ADA transition plan, but it's documented somewhere, and there is a relationship between those two documents. Sounds good. Again, question?
Yeah, I might be a little ahead here, but if someone has a valid grievance and you have a transition Can they sue you? Are you open to a lawsuit, or does that help you having a transition plan in place? Or
It actually does help you. If someone complains about a specific issue, a specific corner or stick-up, and you've got a transition plan that includes that item in the plan, that is a very good beginnings of a defense and say, hey, we're doing what we need to do. We know we have an issue here, and we've scheduled it. We know what we've got to do. We've scheduled the fixes. That is very good protection.
okay.
And the converse of that is you don't have the ADA transition plan, guess what? You're wide open for liability, right? So the fact that you have the ADA transition plan is protection from lawsuits and complaints, especially if you can find them and they are updated and the information is covered. So, yes.
So is there a requirement to update your plan officially every 3 years or 5 years?
That's a recommendation out of FHWA, Federal Highways Administration, recommends that you update it routinely, whatever that means. And they like the idea of 3 years. They're looking at a lot of 3-year visits of local agencies. Not only FHWA, Federal Transit Administration, are trying to set up on a 3-year cycle. They'll come out and look at people, and we, Florida DOT, will schedule our visits to the local agencies on a 3-year cycle so that we don't visit anybody before 3 years. It may not be rightly on a 3-year schedule.
But does the plan itself, the original plan, actually have to be updated, or is it sufficient if we show that we've done projects under that plan?
How you choose to update it is up to you. Whether you pull the original document off the shelf and it says 2006 was a scheduled time, we actually got it in 2006, or no, we had to push it to 2007, that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is have it there, but cross-reference the projects that you did do. So maybe you're not completing this document itself, but at least you have a reference to what you have done in some way, some form. Again, have someone help you do this. When you're out rolling the sidewalks, with whatever tool you have, whatever sets of tools you have, it's nice to have someone there who can help you do it and help you learn. CILs, and Lighthouse for the Blind, they will be glad to help you. Centers for Independent Living, Lighthouse for the would be glad to help you. And there's a lot of other advocacy groups for different types of disabilities. They'll be glad to help you because they know it helps their constituents. It helps their customers. And then make the transition plans available for public inspection. They're public record, right? Once you've completed it. And so it really bothers me when we've done reviews, it has bothered me can I see your transition plan? Is it current? Oh, yes, current, 1996. That's not current. No, 2005, 2010, maybe current, maybe okay, but not something pre-century. Believe it or not, DOJ thought about curb ramps way back when, Department of Justice. The transition plan shall include a schedule for providing curb ramps or other sloped areas where pedestrian walks cross curbs. That's in the regulation. Because the understanding was pre-ADA that we still had a lot of corners and crossings with a curb and no curb ramp. And that's a biggie, right? If you don't have a curb ramp, people in wheelchairs can't go anywhere. They cannot use your streets and your sidewalks. They give you priorities. It's a recommended priority. Government offices and facilities. Transportation facilities, places of public accommodations. Those are the shopping malls and the office buildings and the movie theaters and like that. That's the private businesses, places of public accommodation where the public can go. And then employers, places of business. This is under the title regulation. I've given you the sites. I don't have links to all of them, but I have given you the sites. So if you're really interested and your county or city attorney really wants to go look it up, there you go. There's where they can find them. I mentioned this. Federal Highways Administration and the states are increasing efforts FHWA is required to monitor compliance of recipients with self-evaluation and transition plan requirements. Florida Department of Transportation is a recipient of federal funds, federal transportation funds. Cities and counties and MPOs are sub-recipients. The money doesn't come to us, through us to you, it comes directly to you. But since you are like one layer level under the state, county, city, whatever, hierarchy, you're considered sub-recipients, but you still have responsibilities. And added to that, we have the responsibility to monitor your responsibility, monitor your activities. Under the stewardship agreements with FHWA, state DOTs are beginning to direct sub-recipients to submit transition plans, and we have been doing that for the past like 4 or 5 years now, since I've been involved with the Title II and the SCAT process. Yes, sir.
Can you kind of narrow down sub-recipients? Are those always municipalities? Are they 298 districts? I'm trying to figure out who are direct sub-recipients? Who are the sub-recipients?
Sub-recipients are anyone who receive federal funds under the state level, below the state level, state agency level. Like I'm Florida Department of Transportation, we're the state level. Anyone under the state would be a sub-recipient.
Anybody that accepts any funds?
Any federal funds of any sort, in any department, in any division. Cities, counties, TPAs, villages, towns, communities, whatever, if they have a governmental unit of some sort.
He's talking about special districts.
Have you received federal funds?
We will be from sidewalks.
Yes, sir. You're a sub-recipient. Disney is probably a sub-recipient. I don't know, maybe they don't accept federal funds. They generate enough all their own, maybe. Who all know? And looks what's good. Sometimes, depending on the nature of what we're asking and what the deficiency is, we might be asking you for something on a fairly short notice. I'd like to see your completed transition plan in 90 days, and you're Miami-Dade County. Not going to happen. We might give Miami-Dade County 2 or 3 years to get there. Well, they've already got one. They've got a pretty good one. And if you see the little symbol over here, that's Federal Highways Administration's logo. So if it's something that's sourced from Federal Highways Administration at the federal level, I'm going to source them and let you know this. This is not me talking. This is them. Transition planning. Want to learn how to do one? Here's the basic steps. Plan the work. Conduct the surveys and inventories. Develop the reports and recommendations. And the schedules, and include public input. As part of the process, as also as part of the review. You know, before you send it out for the world, get someone else to look at it. Publish the transition plan, multiple sites, at least on your website and your whatever public access locations you have, and then implement, start working it. And implement it can be a 2-year process, can be a 30-year process, depending on the nature of your entity and the resources available to you. Step 1, plan the work. We're going to go outside and look at things, right? We got to have some teams, right? So select who will be involved. Hopefully it's not just any old everybody, but actually for the first initial part, it actually could almost be everybody. Think about it. We've had some communities that have taken summer school interns, between school year, over the summer, and gone out and done sidewalk inventories. Cheap labor. High school, college students, graduate students, whomever, get some help. You can do it with your in-house staff. You can hire consultants, or maybe in a limited time period, you can maybe use some free outside help, like interns and stuff. Train them, because what they do and what they identify, you're going to be working with for the next few years. Make sure they know what to look for, and refresh the training, maybe monitor what they're doing, and so you can update if you see something, straying just a little bit in their initial reports or surveys. Maybe you can you can redirect them and do the limit. Make sure one of the first things we did, the smart tool, the digital level that you can use, you can program to measure slopes and stuff like that. They can do percent, they can do degrees, they can do inches per foot. We want to be measuring percent. We had one team measured about 100 miles of sidewalks using the degrees selection. All of their data was invalid. They had to go back and redo it all. So make sure you train the people how to use the tools and then schedule them to do it. This can be a year-long thing, it can be a seasonal thing, it can be whatever works for you with your staff, with your resources available to you. Schedule the work. Are you going to use in-house staff? Are you going to use consultants? Again, interns. Combination, take one engineer on the roadside and bring a team of interns with them. Whatever. Architectural consultants, architectural and engineering consultants, they like to charge a lot of money. But if you don't have the capability in-house to do it, that's a choice. To just hire someone, hey, go handle it, go take care of it and report back, let me know. Train the team. What's the scope of the project? How many miles would you like them to do a day? How many intersections would you like them to do a day or a week or a month? Set the project limits. Okay, here's the county line, do that one corridor between these two limits. Or that's too much, let's do four segments within these two limits on this one corridor. Maybe you just do one quadrant of the area, do all the streets within so many city block area. You do another segment, something like that. What are you going to look at? I'm going to look at sidewalks, I'm going to look at curb ramps, I'm going to look at detective warnings, I'm going to look at crossings, I'm going to look at pedestrian push buttons and traffic signals. I'm going to look at obstructions in the sidewalk, fire hydrants, poles, signs, stuff like that. And what am I going to look for in each one of those? Non-compliant elements. Breaks, fractures, slopes wrong. You may have some field staff who are doing the on-the-ground work, and then you have folks back in the office translating that work into something, a usable document, because those field notes can get kind of messy sometimes, possibly. And there's lots of different types of tools available. You definitely want to at least take some sort of measuring devices, a camera to document what you're looking at, measuring tapes, whatever, levels, especially when you're measuring slopes and cross slopes. There's software available. Is anyone aware of SAPFIM? Safe and Accessible Pedestrian Facilities Inventory Model. That is a new program the Florida DOT developed under a grant from the Federal Highways Administration, which is designed solely to help someone do their ADA transition plan on their roadside. It's SAPFIM. They go on the DOT's website, Florida DOT's website, and Google that. You can find it. And what it is basically a tablet-based program that you can carry a tablet into the field, do some measurements, enter the data, just fill in the little check boxes on the tablet, and then it automatically uploads to the cloud, and you've got your data, and you can download it to your server and develop your reports and queries and stuff like that. It is free to local agencies. We, Florida DOT, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, applied for a grant to develop this program with Florida International University. And we offer it free to cities and counties and other states as well to help people do their transition plans. Safe and Accessible Pedestrian Facilities Inventory Model. That is one of the newest tools. There's a lot of other private party tools out. Other cities and states are using other tools as well, but that's one that we developed in-house and with FIU, and we're sharing it with all everybody here in the Florida. It is it's a tablet. I mean, we're talking, you got your little iPad or whatever you can download the program to it and just hit the check boxes as you measure stuff. And nice thing about it, it's GIS, GPS driven, so when you take a photograph with that device of that curb ramp, It knows where you are. It documents the lat long of that location of that device or that crack or that element, whatever. Schedule the work. We're talking schedule the work, not just schedule the inventory. We've already, the inventory is accomplished. Now we have the base document. Now we schedule the actual work, the repairs. You can set some milestones. You know, typically it's an annual type thing. Might you want to do some little shorter, you know, quarterly or monthly or something like that. You know, maybe you don't, maybe you do. Maybe you want to extend. You've got a lot of work to do. You got your annual capital improvement plan. Maybe you want to combine 2 or 3 together and do a big report back in 5 years. You know, another 5 years, report back how your total accomplishments, or you can do your standard 1 year stuff. Now, the information that when you're out there actually in the field doing the work, making the corrections, are you just going to stack up all those reports in the office and hopefully remember to download them in at the end of each year before the CIP cycle starts again? Or might you want to go ahead, start here, administrative assistant. Here's last week's information. Go ahead and upload it into the program and update the information. So but that's up to you how you want to use your resources. Department of Justice has already helped us set some priorities of which we want to do. We've identified thousands of problems. Which ones we do first? DOJ, Department of Justice, has said, hey, this is our idea where you should start. Start with those closest to your government facilities, your government buildings and services, because people got to walk to you sometime. Transportation facilities. Prioritize the bus stops and other transportation facilities. Public accommodations, that's the business, private businesses. Business districts, it could be individual, the mall, the shopping center, the city street or whatever, or you can do the whole district. That's their idea. Here's some examples of the government facilities that they would like you to start with, that people might walk to. Might very likely walk to, if nothing else, from the parking lot into the building, right? But they may have to cross the street to get to the parking lot or cross the street to get to the building. Again, this is Department of Justice. That's not DOT, not Florida DOT, not US DOT. That's Department of Justice. That's their recommendations. Bus stops, train stations, airports, benches, and shelters. Work with your transit agency. If the transit agency is an independent entity, work with them on their bus stops, because their bus stops may be in your right-of-way, which means you may be asked to do something about those bus stops. Sorry, it's not mine. Go talk to them. Yeah, but it's right here. I can see it. It's on yours. Lots of different things that can be in a public accommodation. Shopping center, everybody's going to walk to a shopping center, at least from the parking lot, right? Restaurants, hotels, theaters. And then the urban centers, uptown and downtown, professional offices, cafes, and booths. Those typically the urban center, right downtown, in the middle of downtown, where there's a lot of pedestrian traffic, because there's little or no parking. There may be some on-street parking, but the on-street parking that I need to get to, the shop is 3 blocks away because it's the only parking place I could find. So there's a lot of opportunities for people to be needing to cross the street and use the facility, use the sidewalk facilities. That first one is kind of a gotcha. You built something after the ADA became effective, but you built it wrong. That should be pretty high on the priority list, because now someone said, wait a minute, you built that after ADA, you didn't comply with the law or the regulations or the standards. I can sue you. Put that one pretty high on your list as well. Locations near people, locations where people with disabilities might congregate. emergency shelters, healthcare, critical programs. Maybe you got some areas where an old development's been here for hundreds of years and there's no curb ramps at all. Start thinking about it, because people, if there's sidewalks, there should be curb ramps. People might be wanting to cross the street. And I think, let me see, I think it works. Let's think this is the one link that does work. Yes, it does. So this is an example of the ADA toolkit for state and local government agencies. They have a lot of good information. The first part is just sort of the administrative stuff, the basics, ADA coordinators, notice grievance procedure. That's where you get the sample procedures, or sample grievance procedure and sample notice. Effective communications. How do you do to make sure people can understand what you're trying to tell them? Not only in a live environment, like in this classroom, where if someone was deaf and wanted to attend this class, we would have a sign language interpreter up here translating what I say. If we had someone who was blind, had low vision, couldn't see the screen, we would find an alternate format to allow that person to get the same information, just like you do in any public meeting, public hearing. Do you need an accommodation to participate in this event? What is it? Give us a week to fix it, or provide it, and we'll do this. So hopefully all your public notices have something along that line. If you need an accommodation. Emergency communications. How do you let the blind person know that he's in an evacuation area when he can't see the TV? How do you know the deaf person who can see the TV but can't read the lips of the person who's saying, "Get out, get out"? Website accessibility. This is a fairly recent one. Your public websites, they hopefully are 508 compliant. Anybody heard of W3C? WC3, the World Wide Web Consortium. They have what they call the WCAG 2.0, I think is the current one, or maybe 2.1. The website, something, whatever. The website content accessibility criteria, guidelines, WCAG. Good, clear guidance on how to develop a website so people can you get the information off your website with various types of disabilities. Blind, deaf, limitations on using a mouse. Maybe they need a keyboard, but they can't just navigate using a mouse with a pointer. The blind guy can't see the pointer, the icon on the screen, right? He needs to have the software read while the content is on the screen. And he can talk to the computer, and the computer talk to him back. So there's something we start thinking about. Oh, look at number 6 there. Curb ramps and pedestrian crossings. And guess what? They actually have a checklist for what you should be looking for curb ramps. Yes or no? Have you done it? There's a lot of good checklists here. Let me back that up and go to the next one.
Dean, are the slides advancing?
Oh, you're not seeing what I'm seeing, are you?
No, I'm not.
Hold on a second. Let's try this. Is that more better? I'm sorry about that. I failed to look at the screen, didn't I? So anyway, there's a lot of good information about the toolkit. There's the basic statutes. There's a sample notice and grievance procedures and a checklist for developing your program. Effective communications. Website accessibility. Curb ramps and pedestrian crossings. Look, there's even some survey forms for curb ramps. Look at that. This is good stuff. Okay, you are seeing that now, good. Okay, are you coming? Come on. Didn't come up, did it? Try again.
Very slow.
Hmm?
In this room, it's very slow.
Okay. Well, I'll back up and maybe do the online version rather than the PDF version, because it came up earlier a lot. Here we go. Let's try the HTML version of it. The survey form. There we go. there's a lot of good stuff there. I mean, the checklists are available for you. Yes.
It seems like it's focused mostly on ramps, and you've been getting a lot of requests for audible pedestrian signals, and that's not really, on the website, I don't see that talked about. So how do we assess the need, and how do we prioritize that?
For accessible pedestrian signals, that was never thought about in the original ADA regulations or guidelines, because again, there was nothing about, public right-of-way facilities. The new PROAG talks about accessible pedestrian signals, but they basically refer to the MUTCD on when and how you do those, the manual and uniform traffic control devices. The way you would possibly do these, you could develop your own forms. Do you have pedestrian signals? Are they accessible signals? Are they countdown signals? Since there's not a lot of good national guidance, we have started to develop some here in the state of Florida about how to, when and where to look for accessible signals. Right now, they are not required equipment. They're not required by law or regulation anywhere. We install them at the state DOT in most cities, install them on request. Someone can request one, and that's when you work with a local Lighthouse for the Blind or some orientation mobility group that can help you help the person and have the APSs installed. I'm going to go back to the presentation. Let's see. So, just different things to look at when you're starting to think about looking at your survey. And you asked the question about we're focusing on curb ramps. Right now, that is a really hot ticket, has been for quite a while, a hot ticket item with the Department of Justice. And Justice is the primary enforcing agency for the entire ADA. So they have mostly delegated the responsibility for asking about curb ramps to Federal Highways Administration, USDOT. So that's why, and they're asking us and we're asking you, so it's sort of a downhill thing, but curb ramps are a real hot ticket item right now. A few years ago it was the 2% cross slope on sidewalks, but that's sort of gone away because now it's learned that curb ramps are actually more of a hindrance to accessibility, more of a barrier to access than a little bit of a steep cross slope on a sidewalk. So that's why, but they're right now, we're hearing administrative noise, but we're not getting good technical guidance on what to do with them except for what we can develop in-house. What happens when you have multiple entities in the same area? I mentioned it earlier. A bus stop on your right-of-way. Who's responsible for accessibility to the bus stop? Do you have an agreement? Do you have a permit process? See, that happens a lot. No, it's not my right-of-way, says the transit agency. It's not my bus stop, says the local agency. The transit agency, I have responsibility for access at the bus stop itself. How people get there, they don't care. What about utilities? You guys, there's power poles all over the place, right? There's manholes and there's all sorts of stuff. So how do we coordinate who's responsible for what, doing what, when some element or feature is involved? At an intersection, you got the county road and the city street. Who takes priority when you got to do some improvements at that intersection?
It's all DOT.
Yeah, it's all DOT, right? No. If it's a state road and a county road, we for sure are going to know who's responsible for the work on that intersection. We're going to do the stuff, and you guys do everything else. Reasonable and consistent policies. This is Federal Highways saying that we would like you to establish a way of doing business that works all the time. They almost want one size fits all. That's never going to happen, but they want you to have reasonable and consistent policies on how you're going to do something. When we encounter this situation, what do? We did it this way last year, we did it this way 6 weeks ago, this is the way we should do it today. That way you don't have to guess, okay, the same situation or a similar situation came up, but I don't remember what we did, so maybe let's just do it this way this time. That's not very reasonable and consistent. Should apply across everything. That way, when you come up with a common situation, that you know what to do. This is part of the planning. Plan ahead. What are you going to do? Your surveyors are out there. They've identified a bad curb ramp. What are we going to do? Well, is it too steep, too broken up? You should have a plan. If it's too steep, you rebuild it. If it's just missing the detective warnings, go out and add some detective warnings. Stuff like that. If it's missing the landing at the top, you have right away to add a little patch of level of concrete at the top and leave the curb ramp alone because it's good. Otherwise, it's good. I showed you a couple examples. Make a preliminary assessment of compliance. Check out online maps. Guess what? You can do a lot of sitting in your desk, at your desk work, survey work, using Google Maps, MapQuest, Bing, whatever. There's satellite information up there that you can actually see the street. What, Street View, right? You can see the curb ramp. Believe it or not, in most cases, you might even be able to zoom close enough to see, sitting at your desk, is there a detective warning at the bottom of that curb ramp? You may not, but you may be able to. Especially if you get down in Street View, and then you can pan around, as long as there's not a car or truck in the way, right? When the truck came through. There's a couple of checklists. We looked at the one. This is a nice place to start. Sitting at your desk, you can go out and find, okay, there's some areas over here we need to really go look at first. They're near government centers. We have some questionable issues. Do you have some standard plans, standard drawings that you use for curb ramps and sidewalks and crossings and signals and stuff like that? And now's a good time to start pulling them out and checking and looking at them. They may help you with the scheduling and the estimating of the cost. To work with your estimating group about, okay, we've got to rebuild so many curb ramps this month or this year. How much is that going to cost us? What kind of resources is that going to take? Let's take about a 10-minute break, if we will.
Yeah. And we have a public survey on there, links in both English and Spanish, and we would strongly encourage you to take the survey yourself. You can only take it one time from each device. And also, please consider sharing it. If your city or agency has a newsletter and you can put a little plug in there, you don't even have to put in there it's Palm Beach TPA and get into that if space prohibits it or whatever. The important thing is we want the public to get the information and as many people as possible to respond. We intend to keep that survey open until the end of this year. So we've got a little bit of time. If you have a newsletter that's only monthly or something, please consider putting that in there. And also, I would appreciate any follow-up, but don't think I'm ignoring you if you email or call me in the next few days. I'm leaving town in a few hours, so I will definitely get back to you. Also, the Palm Beach TPA, we do have a web page specifically for the ADA. I think that was an email we sent to you. But our intention is, with the help of Kilson, to put more relevant information there. But mostly, we want to link to your plans, and we thought that was going to be simple until we saw the file size of some of your plans. And actually, what I was just telling Jamie is I don't want to link to a wonderful example of a plan that, first of all, is too large for anyone to open or takes up a ton of file space. But if we have this great PDF plan example, but it was adopted last year and he's updated it, and I don't know that, I would rather if each entity, if you guys have a page, which is probably beneficial to you, that we can link to your page, your whatever your page /ADA or whatever you call it, that we can just do the link. And that way, whatever link we do, your files are stored on your website and we know we're giving someone the link to get the most relevant information. So we don't have to worry about amendments or updates that we may not be aware of. So, and also we've had some requests about continuing education hours, the possibility of that for engineers. So Jessica is going to check into that. If anyone would be potentially interested, and I don't know about the opportunity retroactively, but her firm is capable of doing that, I believe. If anyone's interested in that for planning or anything else, AICP, We haven't explored that, but we can, so if you have that interest, if you could mention that to Jessica back there, or she knows, but if there are actually people in here, individuals that would impact.
And
Michelle and Drew in here?
Just make sure you sign in, and if you sign in, we'll follow up with the group afterwards. I should know by the time the meeting's over if we can apply for you.
Perfect.
So.
Great.
I
But
know
that
that's
would be for engineers, right? Not for AICP?
Yeah, it's for PE, and I'm also exploring AICP, so I'll let you guys know.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. We'll turn it back over. Nicole, are you ready? Okay, we're going to turn it back over to Dean. I've asked Nicole to wave her hand to stop us in the middle of the program. If she needs to change the tape or something, then Dean, if you see her over there frantically waving, please pause for a few moments
Okay.
so that she can change that, and then we'll
Okay.
resume after another brief
And we'll just talk about it while the camera's off, right?
Exactly. Thank you.
Well, good morning and welcome back. Thank you. Any questions from what we've covered so far? The very beginnings, the basic steps of starting an ADA transition plan and why we need to do it. Okay, good. So, the actual, how do you do the survey itself? What do you look for? Well, you want to look for what the standards tell you to look for, basically what the regulations tell you to look for. Sidewalks and curb ramps are going to be the key features. They're the primary elements for pedestrian access along the roadside, of course. Clear widths, cross slopes, landings, grades, discontinuities. You got the sidewalk that starts here, then picks up again 100 feet away. You may want to start documenting that because maybe one day you might want to start thinking of adding new sidewalks. Or at least connect the dots, as it were. And then detectable warnings. But you're definitely going to be looking for stuff like this, right? That's an ADA issue as well as a trip and fall issue. You might get a letter or a phone call from an attorney faster from someone whose client fell and hurt themselves than from the guy using a wheelchair possibly. But hopefully your maintenance guys are out here avoiding stuff like this to begin with. And then I don't know why we like to put our curb ramps at the lowest part on the corner, so to hold the water for the long, maybe that's part of our retention, stormwater retention plan or something like that. I don't know. But I hate seeing that because nobody wants to use that, wheelchair or not. Nobody wants to use that. And who knows what's hiding under there anyway? What kind of debris or surprises might be buried under that water? Look at the materials, look at the finishes. Are they in good condition? Are they broken up? Are there cracks? Are there gaps? Are there holes? Are there missing pieces? This guy up here, that's a pretty nice curb ramp. And that's probably a bicycle safe grate that direction. It's a nobody safe grate that direction. Imagine someone using a wheelchair getting a wheel stuck down in that grate. How do you fix that? Well, you can either take the cheap way out and move the curb ramp, or you can take the really, really expensive way out and move the inlet. Probably not going to move the inlet.
You change the grade.
Or change the grade to one that actually meets the ADA criteria. But guess what? Right now, none of our standard grades meet that. And this is one of the standard grades. Unless you've got some special designs for pedestrian safe grades, that's wonderful if you do. But most of the ones that we see around are either the reticuline grate that has those trapezoidal-shaped holes in them between the steel blades, or the slotted cast iron grades. So there's a lot of places where our standard devices may not meet the criteria for a pedestrian environment. Look for obstructions. Maybe some of it's just simple maintenance. Trim the bushes. Could be something as simple as that, and that can be something to be fixed tomorrow or next week or next month. This is going to probably take a long-term plan, right, to fix, do a little more involved. Traffic signals, can they be used? Are they in an accessible location? There's a lot of information on the manual and uniform traffic control devices for where pedestrian signals should be. We haven't even started talking about accessible signals yet, but just where pedestrian signals themselves should be before you start to get to the accessible features. But can someone use them using a wheelchair? That's probably the basic thing. Can I reach it sitting in a wheelchair? Is the surface near the push button level enough that I'm not going to get out of control when reaching, letting go of the wheel and going for the button? Step 3. Now you've done all your surveys. You've looked at your sidewalks, you looked at your curb ramps, you looked at your detectable warnings, you've looked at your ped signals, you've looked at your crossings, you've looked at obstructions in the sidewalks. It's a perfectly good sidewalk, but there's a fire hydrant right in the middle of it. Oops. And then you start developing reports. You take the field reports, you start documenting, do you have a history of when these things were done? Do you have a fairly new sidewalk that you know was built post-ADA, post-92? Or is this something that's been out there in use since the 60s or 70s? Maybe hopefully someone will have a record of when these things were done. Because that's the ones we talked about, not only DOJ, but these should be pretty close to the top of your list. You built them wrong to begin with. And somebody's going to catch you doing those. Make sure you check out the ones near the government facility. Again, this is part of remember the DOJ priority list? This is basically where this is from. You've got all your lists. You've checked your 1,000 curb ramps, you've checked your 400 crossings, and you've checked miles and miles and miles of sidewalks. What do I do with all that data? Well, what's the adjacent property use? Government services, hospitals, schools, public accommodations, stuff like that. That's where you start looking at, okay, what are the adjacent uses? And not only how bad is the damage that you're looking at, but who's using it? Who's the potential users of that particular area? What resources do you have? Do you have $10 million to fix sidewalks this year? Good for you. Do you have $100,000 to fix sidewalks over the next 25 years? We might have some issues. We might have some problems. And it might be actually moving some monies around. We've got limited resources. We've all got our tax base. We know how much money we have or will have. But we need to start assigning some of those money a little bit differently than we might have in the past. Are there some adjacent uses which may hinder any corrections? Someone during the break mentioned that they've got some sidewalks to a residential area. Most of the residential driveway turnouts has too much cross slope at the slope because the sidewalk literally tilts into the street. That's fairly typical. Now, is that something that needs to be fixed right today, tomorrow, yesterday? Or is there something higher on the list in a different area that may take precedence and you come back to do this when you've got the resources and you've got coordination with the adjacent property owners who will say, yes, you can rebuild my driveway to meet the ADA because those are my customers that I would like to also have come into my business. Now, there's a lot of people that say, you're not touching my driveway. I put those pavers down, my grandfather molded those hundreds of years ago. You're not touching that. Not much we can do there, possibly. Respond to request. If someone calls you with a complaint or just a request, say, hey, I can't get across the street on this intersection and it's between my house and the bus stop I use to get to work. Because I've got a new job and now I have to use this new route. Might you want to bubble that one up to a little bit higher, sooner on the list of things to do? Sure. Is it on the transition plan? You've identified there's an issue there. Maybe you scheduled it 3 years out. You can move things around in the schedule, especially if people have called you and say, hey, could you please? That's good public service. It's on the plan. We knew we were going to do it. We just can do it at a different time than we had planned. Switch things around a little bit. And some entities have done, you'd have identified your ADA issues. Are you going to create a separate ADA construction, renovation, rehabilitation program? Or are you going to roll these ADA upgrades into your standard capital improvements plan, but document that these are the features that were itemized on the ADA transition plan, and we're including them in this series of projects? That sounds like a real good idea. Thank you. Again, the schedule. People want to know the schedule. Are you going to get to it next week, next year, 15 years from now? Doesn't do me any good if my kids need to cross the street to go to elementary school and you're not going to fix it for 10 years. set out your corrections. Design the corrections. That's part of that consistent, reasonable consistent, right? You know you've got a curb ramp that's too steep, or it's doesn't have a landing, or doesn't have the appropriate, configuration. Maybe you have plans for rebuilding a curb ramp. Maybe you should have a plan for. Of course, you need to estimate. You got to know the resource can be involved, right? Schedule the corrections. I'm sure they're going to be multi-year unless you're a really small community and you've only got a few things to do. You can get them out in the next few months and you're done. Or you need to schedule. Use the priorities to establish the schedules over the next 1, 2, 5, 10 years, whatever. Remember the Sacramento lawsuit? They gave them 30 years to make their corrections. There's a lot of sidewalks and bad sidewalks in the city and county of Sacramento. Are there any other standards that you can use or that apply? We got the ADA standards. Do you have your own set of public works and design standards, road and street standards? Do you use the Florida DOT design standards? Do you use the Florida Green Book? There's criteria in each of those that may help you establish the appropriate corrections and fixes. Are there other ways to do something? Maybe this sidewalk over here is really, really horrible, and but it's running down next to a very rural area. There's no driveways, there's no attractions, there's no businesses, no residents on that side, but there's been a sidewalk there, it's been forever. We just don't want to do anything with it. Maybe there's a sidewalk on this side. Maybe we can fix this sidewalk where all the businesses and the residences are and remove the old sidewalk. Move the other sidewalk on the other side that nobody's using anyway. Is it really needed? That's one thing to think about. And then, who's going to watch it happen? Is it going to be your ADA coordinator? Is it going to be the director of public works? Is it going to be some project manager or so? Make sure that it's clear that someone monitoring the work. Because that 1993 transition plan that's been on the shelf collecting dust for years and somebody didn't even know if they had it, isn't doing you any good as a defense for working at an ADA transition plan. How to rectify long-term problems in a logical manner. It's going to take us 20 years to complete this plan. How are you going to do that? What are you going to do in the first 2 years or 5 years or 10 years? Plan the plan. Plan the work. Be as specific as you possibly can. Are we going to do this corridor, these series of corridors? We can do this quadrant. We can do this neighborhood. We can do this development. We can do this downtown, this urban center. Where are your priorities? Work through your priorities. And make sure, of course, you use detectable warnings on your curb ramps. Everybody knows what they are, right? The truncated domes, the stuff that everybody loves to hate because nobody really knows how to do them correctly all the time, easily, comfortably, reasonably, because no two curb ramps look alike. They may be designed and exactly, hey, use this exact plan, but field conditions vary and change, right? So what's on the plan may be a little bit different than what's in the field, and then where the layout in the plan may be a little bit different than what you might find and be able to end up with in the field.
Are you going to talk more about detectable warnings later?
That is that's a whole different subject, but I can answer a few questions about it now if you'd like me to talk about detectable warnings. Since I brought it up, right?
Yeah. Where are they required?
They are required at every street crossing, road or street crossing, at a curb ramp or a blended transition, where the street, wherever the pedestrian way and the vehicular way cross at the same level, they're flush. You have to have detectable warnings there. You have to have them at large commercial driveways into the public right-of-way, which is served by a traffic signal. Or maybe a smaller, medium commercial driveway, which may have a stop sign or a yield sign. You're not required to have them at every little mom and pop, and every little gas station, not to have them at any residential. They're only required where it's considered to be a hazardous vehicular crossing.
So I'm designing a park,
Uh-huh.
have internal drive within the park.
Right,
There's no right-of-way, it's an internal drive.
right.
Does, if I have a crossing of that drive, that roadway internal to the park, do I need that?
My question to you for that would be, what is the posted traffic speed?
25 is our typical.
They're probably not required, but if you're real concerned and you've got lots of families with young kids and people on bikes on the crossing trails or the paths, you might consider them. They might not be required, but if you have concerns about someone darting out into traffic on a busy weekend, a holiday, visitation or something like that, you might consider them, but they might not technically be required.
They're not technically required in a parking lot. Or-
Not in a parking lot. They're not required in a parking lot. In fact, the latest 2010 ADA standards for accessible design, the non-transportation ones, don't require them at all. They hardly even talk about detectable warnings. So in a parking lot, on a site, they're not required because typically the traffic speeds are slower and the volume's lower. Yes.
DOT, they used to have a volume on the standard sheet for detectable warnings of commercial driveways.
That's old information. We don't use that criteria anymore. We used to be, originally it was 24 feet wide or wider, used detectable warnings, and it was 600 vehicles a day or more, you use detectable warnings on a driveway, but now that's gone away. We're using the criteria right out of the PROAG now, which is the commercial driveways with signals or signs or a roadway crossing, street crossing.
Almost most commercial driveways have a stop sign.
Then you would use them there.
Okay.
But a corner gas station has the big wide driveway, but it doesn't have stop signs or stop bars. You don't need them there.
Is there any difference if the sidewalk stays at the same
Nope.
height versus dropping down?
It's the traffic control device which governs whether you use the detectable warnings or not.
And what about an alley that wouldn't have a stop sign for that?
I wouldn't use it. I wouldn't put them there. No, I mean, they're not required. Traffic signal, stop sign, yield sign. Or on a main roadway with a side street, you're crossing the main road, there's nothing there, but you still need to detect warnings. That's even more hazardous, right? When there's no signal or sign. Include public input. When do you want to do it? I think I mentioned it a couple of times earlier, right? Get them involved early. We're going to start our ADA transition planning process, self-evaluation transition plan. Who would like to help us? Who would like to benefit from helping us so you help yourself? At the beginning, invite them to be part of the team. When you start getting your preliminary findings, get the help. Let them review it. Are you headed in the right direction? Are you getting the information that they think is useful? And then when you come up with recommendations for what you do, of course, now it's a public review, right? How do you do it? Well, obviously in public hearings, right? If we're going to do a transition plan, this is what we're thinking about doing, or these are our findings, this is what we're thinking about doing. Can you do online stuff? Sure, why not? Maybe not everybody has access to it, but that's one opportunity, one option. Get your advocacy groups. Lighthouse for the Blind, Centers for Independent Living. They'll be glad to help. They're anxious to help their constituents by helping you. Advocacy groups, that wasn't easy to say. Is there a community group, disabled advocacy group in your community that you either created as part of your entity, your agency, or they're private, separate from the lighthouses and the CILs, or there's some little more local groups or can be quite vocal. Nice thing to add, if you invite these guys to be on your team, they're less likely to be your adversaries later. Is there some one person you would really like to get their information because you know this person is very knowledgeable or is very vocal or has been I want to say a frequent flyer, but someone who's been very, but complains a lot because you don't know what you're doing? Okay, come help us. We invite you to help us do it right. Tends to shut them up. A few years ago, had some guy I would would get on emails and phone calls from him. Of course, the emails were all caps, fire everybody, nobody knows what they're doing, because this one curb ramp is bad. Fire the governor, fire the mayor, fire the county commissioner. Oh, Dean Perkins, an idiot, he didn't know what he was doing. After about 4 or 5 times of him doing that, and me responding within 2 days or a week or a couple of weeks of fixing the problem, next thing you know, the emails I'm getting from him are copies of where I'm copied, and he's called someone. If you need something fixed, call Dean. By responding quickly, we turned him around. He no longer says, I'm going to sue you or I'm going to get you fired. I'm going to say, I need your help. Come help me fix this. Because I know you'll do it. That's the type of person you want to be. Now, I'm hoping it doesn't take 27 and a half years to get to that position. That's how long I've been in this position, by the way. But it also felt good that the emails, oh no, not another email from him. Oh, wait a minute, that one's not so bad. Again, use technology to its maximum extent, to the best benefit. Not only can you see the roads and the city, but what are the adjacent property uses? This helps you with your priorities, right? So now you have that information early on that begins you start thinking priorities. Oh, maybe this is a government center. Maybe we need to not only plan the work in this area first. Let's go survey this area first. Right? And then you start ranking and valuing and prioritizing. Some of the entities we've seen their transition plans, they use the red light, red, green, and yellow, just like we see with traffic signals, right? Green is compliant, or it's substantially compliant, way down on the list to do anything about or nothing about. Yellow is, we need to start looking at these, or we got some questions about what needs to be done here. Red is, this is obviously bad, bubble to the top of the list of things to do. And you can do that on the map with the GIS. You can have overhead aerial maps with red lines and yellow lines and green lines on all the sidewalks and crossings of things to look at. Little red dots where the bad curb ramps are. Little green dots where the good ones are. Go somewhere else, find something else to look at. It works. It actually works because people are visual. Don't give me 400 pages of tables of text and numbers and words. Give me a few pictures. The old adage, a picture says 1,000 words, really works. It actually works in this case. Because you can not only see the locate, you can see the extent. Because most of the overhead aerials, they have scales. 200 feet, 400 feet, 1,000 feet, a mile. You can actually get a fairly accurate, within a few percentage points, scale of how much work there is to be done. A 5-foot sidewalk, it's 750 feet long. You can estimate that. 7 curb ramps at this one intersection. One good one, 7 bad ones. You can estimate that. And then finalize the plan. Improve, schedule it for each year. Include a schedule for each year. You want to do an independent ADA plan? You've got money to throw just at ADA. Lucky you. Do you have the resources? You've got projects coming up that are approximately in the same areas, the same regions, the same corridors. Can you go ahead and roll these ADA upgrades into the current projects? You might have to modify the scope a little bit more. You might have to add a few more resources, adjust the budget a little bit, because you hadn't planned on putting in 47 curb ramps on this project. But now, it behooves you, it's the best use of your resources to do it, go ahead and do it now, because it's fairly high on the priority list. You all know that if you do a resurfacing project, you better be looking at curb ramps, right? 5 years ago, the U.S. Department of Transportation, U.S. Department of Justice issued some new, what they call technical assistance, that set criteria for when and what type of nature of resurfacing project requires curb ramp upgrades to deficient ones or new ones if they're not there. That's the okay. That's another different link. And they also, so what they do, they said these type of operations are maintenance operations. You don't have to worry about curb ramps. these types of resurfacing operations are alterations to the roadway, you better be looking at curb ramps. And there's a whole, I could do a whole class, in fact, I have done a whole 2-hour class just on that one subject. There's on the U.S. Department of Transportation's website, there is a link to this. It's called Joint Technical Agreement, U.S. Department of Transportation and Department of Justice, Joint Technical Agreement. Maybe if you just go to the FHA way and Google or search on Joint Technical Agreement, it'll go to it. But it's actually a lot of good information about if you're doing a resurfacing of existing roadways, how much you need to add to the project to work on curb ramps. The link at the bottom of this page is actually an NCHRP report from 2009 that is a guide to best practices for ADA transition plans. Go there. That's the best information you're going to get. Yes, it's 9 years old, but it is the best. It'll get you started. It'll tell you what you need to do. It gives you the details. It gives you, and it'll show you example reports. It'll show you sample ways of doing reports, different processes. And if you email me, I can send you not only a link to this, but I can also send you 3 or 4 good examples of a local agency transition plan for different size agencies. You know, big LA County or a small town of Wellington, village of Wellington, right? So I can help you with the resources. That's what we do with the SCAT process. People have issues with transition plans, we provide the resources. This is one of them. And then we can also provide you good examples that you can see what is involved, what somebody else has done, what theirs looks like. And of course, hopefully your maintenance guys are looking for the new issues, the cracks. The detected warnings is cracking up and sliding off into the gutter. Stuff like that. It happens. But that's hopefully what your maintenance crews are looking for, stuff like that. It can be executive summary with references to the appendices or some other location where the details are. Or you can post all 4,700 megabytes of information. Depends on, I would probably start with the executive summary with links to the more detailed information. Implement the plan. Train your folks. We got to start working this stuff now, folks. We're going to rebuild some curb ramps. We're going to do some sidewalks. We're going to move some stuff around. Train your folks. Good scopes of work, good design, construction plans. Train your designers. Train your contractors. That's what we've done. We've had more luck training our contractors than we did with the designers. Designers, we know everything. Contractors don't follow the plans. Or the field conditions vary just a little bit, so the contractors are trying to adapt the plans. Well, they adapt them 3 times in the exact same place wrong, and they have to rip it up 3 times in the same place. It gets real expensive, and they get real frustrated. So we started training our contractors and our inspectors. So even if they have a problem in the field, they have begun to have an idea how to work with it. How to make it right. Build-in tolerances. Tell your designers, don't design to 2%. Design to 1.5%. Wow, that's a weird concept. Don't design to the standard. Design to less than the standard. Why? Well, think about it. When you build something, especially like concrete or asphalt, is it perfectly level and planar and flat and smooth and perfectly meets the 2% exact? No, there's surface variations. There's construction tolerances. If you design the tolerance in at 1.5%, you might actually get 2% cross slope on your sidewalks. Seems kind of reasonable to me. Again, Review the plans before they go out. Inspect the jobs as they're being constructed. Don't wait to the end of the job to inspect it. Inspect it during the course of the work. That way you can catch things early and not have to back up and delay a project towards the end when everybody, oh, it's all we're done. No, there's some things that need correction. Hold people accountable. Verify construction in the field. I just said this. Inspect, inspect, inspect. Don't wait to the very end to inspect your project. Because if there's a problem, it's almost too late to fix it. You know what a good thing to do for if you're rebuilding a sidewalk or building a new sidewalk? Measure the forms, the cross slope of the forms and the running slope of the forms before the concrete arrives. Don't wait till the concrete's on the ground to find out you got a problem with your 2% cross slope. It gets real expensive to fix it then. Monitor for maintenance. We showed this earlier with the tree, the shrubbery growing over the sidewalk. This is probably a design and construction issue. Why is that wrong? Think of the person with a vision impairment who's blind, who may be shorelining the edge of the sidewalk, can walk right out on the road, never knew that they were walking into the road until they got there. That's a case where the detectable warnings really need to go all the way around the corner. Don't leave any gaps. Another issue with the detectable warnings, they don't say, here's the crossing. They say, watch out, here's a street, here's a road. You step out without paying attention, you might get hit. It's a place to stop and pay attention. Again, this person with a vision impairment, right? They can't see the curb, they can't see the roadway edge, but they can feel the domes, the truncated domes, and they know to stop and listen for a safe gap in traffic. Train your maintenance staff. Oh yeah, we do our drive-bys every quarter. We go out there, we look at 100 miles of roads at 45 miles an hour. Those windshield inspections, right? We heard about a lot of those after Andrew a few years back. So, something as simple as debris laying in the bottom of the curb ramp because the last rain washed some stuff in there, that's a problem. You know, if it's soft sand, and if it's real thick soft sand or something like that blown in like from a beach, you might have some issues. Train your maintenance guys, not just to do the routine, we go out every 4 months or every 3 months and do it. Let them, on their way to work, get them to start looking at things. Oh, I saw something questionable, on back there on Belvedere on the way to work today, so let's go back and look at it the next day or two, go check it out. All it might take is a broom, right? Some things can be fixed quickly. The debris in the bottom of a curb ramp. A single crack on a sidewalk, which is not too bad. Get out there with a grinder or a saw and cut that high edge off a little bit. Some things can be included in other projects. We talked about including stuff in the CIP, Capital Improvement Plan, or the work program. Resurfacing projects. Some may be serious enough or complex enough that you might have to actually plan just an ADA issues only project. This is serious enough that we need to apply dedicated resources to that thing, that issue, that location. Some can wait, right? The tree limbs or the landscape material, it's growing. It's hanging over the sidewalk about a foot. We still got 4 feet of sidewalk left. We'll wait on that. That sidewalk slab that was 2 inches high over the tree root, fix that one tomorrow. This afternoon if possible. Because if someone trips and falls on that, you will get sued. Guaranteed. Some examples. That's a get out your clippers and you're done. We're talking a 3-minute fix, maybe 30-second fix. A little bit more involved But you can add a little concrete, problem solved. You know, we're talking a couple $100 fix. Okay, $500 of mobilization, whatever. You don't have to move the pole. The person with a white cane he will find the pole and he'll work his way around it. Now we're working helping with the guy with the wheelchair to actually physically get around the pole because he needs the surface. What do you see here? Any issues there? How about up on the other side of the street? You got him into the street. Now what? There's a bus stop on the other side of that gap, but I live on this side of that gap and I use a wheelchair. How do I get there? You know what? I might actually not use that bus stop at all because I can't get there. I might call Dial-A-Ride, complimentary paratransit, which costs more per ride than the fare every single time.
If he's in a wheelchair, he can't get off the bus, get to the bus.
He can't get to the bus stop.
I mean, well,
He can't even get to the bus because there's no boarding and lighting area either. So it's not an accessible bus stop. And the bench is not supposed to be sitting off in the grass. It's supposed to be sitting within a maneuvering space next to it, right? So the wheelchair user can sit next to the bench, not on the bench. So there's multiple issues with this type of configuration situation. Gap. Hopefully this one was fixed long before it got to be this bad, right? Something caved in underneath and the sidewalk collapsed. That sidewalk's still in motion. Tree root is lifting the sidewalk. You see they've already done some grinding there and some grinding there, but we've still got some issues, so that sidewalk's being lifted even more. Now's maybe a chance to go ahead and do the real project. Lift up a few sidewalk slabs, remove them, put some new stuff back down. I was working with Professor Gilman at the University of Florida a few years ago doing a training about urban trees and sidewalks. This is an issue with trees adjacent to sidewalks. He's come up with a fairly simple solution. If you've got trees adjacent to sidewalks, new trees, new sidewalks, old sidewalks, when you rebuild the sidewalk or install it new, put about 6 inches layer of gravel underneath the sidewalk and build the sidewalk on top of the gravel. The tree roots will hunt and peck through the gravel. They won't lift the sidewalk. I said, well, why would they do that? He says, the tree roots are looking for air. They're looking for water, they're looking for nutrients, they're looking for air. And sometimes the only way they can get to the air is to push up the sidewalk on top so they can catch air through the cracks. Weird. Why would a root need air? I don't get that, but he said that's true. He's an arborist that works at the University of Florida.
It'll work with concrete, but it won't work with asphalt.
Probably not.
Yeah, trees go right into the asphalt.
Yeah, they just go right through it. Yeah, they just go right through it, yeah. This one probably needs to be looked at a little bit closer, maybe put a couple of curb ramps in. This is a case where you're probably not going to put a curb ramp there, you're probably not going to but you might want to put the curb ramp back here, and this being a lower landing area, right? A shared landing area at the bottom. So there's a lot of things that you come up with a situation like this, maybe you already have a plan for it. Or maybe this is the only time you've ever seen this, you've never seen this before, we got to think something up, make something up. But this one is obviously, should be fairly high on the list, except maybe it's in a residential area and nobody's never complained about it, so maybe you want to, it's still on the list, but maybe it didn't bubble to the top. That's probably been there quite a while because most of the time we don't see power poles right at the back of curb anymore, right? How do I get to the buttons? The ped detector's there. I'm not sure, I don't think it's an accessible pedestrian signal, but I can't use it if I'm using a wheelchair or a walker that I can't get in through the grass, right?
There's no sidewalk at all.
No sidewalk at all, but they got the pedestrian facilities. Not sure what they were thinking here. Apparently the sidewalk guy and the curb guy didn't quite communicate very well. Curb ramp's supposed to be here, right? Publish the plan. Make it available for public record. Implement the plan. Seek review and comment. Monitor the work. Keep it updated. Yes, it can change as resources change. Circumstances change. It's not engraven in stone. It's a living document. Yes.
Dean, I hope this is a good time to interject that. Is there a formal process that these entities should go through to have your office, you, review their plans? And I think we have entities, hopefully, in this room, if they need work, but they think they have a plan. You don't. You know their plan, and you don't find it to be sufficient, but that may not have been communicated to them. Or, and yours, even if it's not a formal thing, being the opinion that
Right.
FHWA may take if they also took a hard look at some of these plans. So some entities have a one-pager. If we touch it, we'll fix it. You're saying that's not sufficient. And others may have a stellar plan, but they don't know you. They don't know to communicate that to you, so you aren't aware of that.
Right.
So, and especially since we're going to be posting links, hopefully, from our website, we don't want to embarrass anybody by, here are 2 great programs, and guess what does that say about everyone else? But what is the process that these entities all, and not the ones in the room today, but the ones who aren't, how do they become aware of you? What time commitment do you have to formally or informally to review and respond and give feedback to their plans?
Right.
And to let those who have something that they think is sufficient and you don't disagree to resolve that?
Right. Well, the Florida Department of Transportation, in concert and basically at the direction of Florida Division FHWA, has implemented a local agency program plan, a LAP program. We started that about 15 years ago. We revamped it about 5 or 6 years ago and refreshed it with new criteria. And about 5 or 6 years ago when we started the SCAT process, the sub-recipient compliance assessment team process, where that's when we go out and review things. But prior to us coming to do an on-site review, we will request as we schedule reviews of local agencies, when typically through the LAP certification process. Is everyone here aware or know if their agency is LAP certified? So raise your hands if you know you're LAP certified. Are you even aware of the LAP process? But you're not LAP certified, maybe you haven't applied because you don't have a project coming up or something like that. But part of that process, the LAP certification process and the SCAT process, we've also developed an online information sharing resource called LAPIT, Local Agency Program Information Technology or Information Tool. It's an online program that we request local agencies, when it's time to schedule a review or when they want to request a project to use LAP funds, local agency program funds, they can post online the documents. We have the SCAT form, which has 16 questions on it, and you answer yes, no, and then there's places to apply links for. If you've got someone that's already posted, you can put the link to that, or you can a little descriptor of what it is. So there's 16 questions on that, and then we ask you to post that SCAT form on the LAPIT website, and then start attaching other documents, Title VI program, grievance procedure, ADA procedure, notice, ADA transition plan, and a lot of other stuff. There's a lot of different choices. You can dump all sorts of good stuff up there on LAPIT. There's a lot of locations for it. The program is set up so that each agency will have one contact person who has access to LAPIT. Can be the city manager, it can be the ADA coordinator, it can be the Title VI coordinator, it can be the HR administrator, HR director, whomever the local agency decides. And that's the person we're responsible for posting and advising us that when they post something, they advise us, or at least through the Title VI coordinator, just send an email, say, we have posted, we're here, go look at it. And that's when we will go back onto LAPIT. We have permission to go onto LAPIT and download those documents and review them. And the SCAT form itself is the one we look at first. There's 16 questions. The first 3 are what we call the deal killers. If you cannot answer yes to the first 1, 2, and 3 questions, sorry, you don't qualify for LAP funds. If you answer yes to all the first 3 questions, and then all the others can be informational, directional, but we're not going to hold your feet to it. We may ask for more information, but we're not going to say, sorry, you don't qualify because you missed, posting, on your website and in a building and public notice and stuff like that. Has anybody submitted stuff through LAPIT? Do you know of anybody who's sent stuff through LAPIT? Was it very, 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 very onerous? No. No, wasn't that bad at all? I'm glad you said that. That's why we want to try to keep it as simple as possible. Reduce the paperwork. That way people aren't sending us 1,000-page documents. We can go online and read that 87-megabyte file. We can do that, but we can go read that 3-kilobyte file that has 2 pages, right? And we have different people on the SCAT team. We have Jackie Paramore, who looks at Title VI issues. We have Carrie Shepard at Federal Highways Administration, looks at Title VI and ADA issues. I'm the one that looks at and accepts or not accepts or provides guidance on ADA transition plans. And so it's not a formal, we approve this process and carry on, you're doing good, or we don't approve, sorry, you can't use this, try again. We will, if we have questions, like I've said before, if we have questions about something, we will request additional information. We will say, maybe you need to rethink this, and then we'll provide the resources. That's when we start providing the resources back, saying, take a look at yours, take a look at the guidance, take a look at what other people have done, and we don't try to say, every small little town community has to have a 100% complete ADA transit, like maybe Miami-Dade County or city or county of Los Angeles, because those are multi-million, resident folk locations. We don't expect you to have, 100 kilobyte or 100 megabyte document if you're a small community. You don't have the resources. But we do expect you to provide the level of information that matches your resources. What are your capabilities, not only to submit the plan, but also to then implement the plan downstream. So it's not a formal process, at least as far as the ADA transition plan, it's not. But I will take a look at them and I will provide advice and guidance if I see issues. Or I'll say, this is great, can we use that as an example? And we've done that a few times here in Florida. We've got a few here that we would say, hey, that's a really good one. Do we have your permission to share it with others? As a good example. And most folks say, well, yeah, that's okay, we don't mind. So people like to be used as good examples, it's not so much bad examples, right? That help?
Yes, thank you. And I would just add to that, though, anyone in here, if you have any doubt, or even if you don't, if you think you're confident that you have a plan, talk to Dean privately. See if he agrees with you, or if he thinks that needs work, because that may not have been communicated to your agency, or may not filter down to you. But
Right.
bottom line is there are only a couple that you recognize as being even acceptable in the county.
But we're not naming names, right?
No. Well, you're welcome to.
No, I will not be naming
I'm
names.
here to shame you.
No.
Those are not good odds for the number of.
I will not be naming names at all, period. Enough said. Picture's worth 1,000 words. That's what we really want to see. A good, clean, usable, comfortable pedestrian environment. Ah, now we get to be, these are the other guys. It's a requirement. It's law. Thou shalt do ADA transition plans. You don't have a excuse not to. It's good policy. You do an ADA transition plan, now you know more about yourself. Now you know about your facilities. Where are you in the progression and access of your constituents? This always seems to bubble to the top of the list. If you don't do it, you're going to get sued. And believe it or not, people have sued for lack of ADA transition plans. And has anybody heard of the U.S. Department of Justice's Project Civic Access?
No.
Okay.
Visit us.
You haven't been visited yet. Good for you, but you know about it. And you're aware of what they ask, right? U.S. Department of Justice has a program they call Project Civic Access, which sounds really nice and fun, right? Well, what it means is if they get a complaint that they think they need to come check it out, they will send architects and engineers and planners and attorneys to come visit you. Talk to your mayor, talk to your council, talk to your commissioners, and say, you know, we've had this little thing brought to our attention, and we think we need to do a little review of your facilities. And the architects and the engineers and the planners and the lawyers will wander all through the records. They'll walk the streets, they'll flush the toilets, they'll use the water fountains, they'll park their cars. And you'll get a report in a few weeks back from them saying, we found these issues. You know, inaccessible bathrooms, parking spaces, curb ramps, sidewalks, pet detectors, whatever they find. And oh, by the way, we didn't see your transition plan. We don't think you have one. You never said you had one. So guess what? Now you get to not only fix these bathrooms and the parking spaces and the streets and the crossings, we want to see your and we want you have typically 6 to 12 months to develop an ADA transition plan. That's again someone outside telling you what you need to do, right? Wouldn't you rather be telling yourself, these are the resources we have available to us, this is what we could reasonably do to develop an ADA transition plan? Wouldn't it behoove us to go ahead and do it on our schedule rather than on DOJ's schedule? That's what happens with a lot of lawsuits. The judge tells you, we want to see an ADA transition plan in 6 months. But wait a minute, we don't have that. I don't care. Give us an ADA transition plan in 6 months. So that's not quite getting sued. DOJ is not suing you, but the Department of Justice is an agency full of attorneys that know how to write lawyerese to your city council or town council or county attorney, and they will be watching you as well. And then the bottom line, it's the right thing to do. Not only is it the law, but it's the right thing to do. In this environment, in this age, we have customers out there that want to contribute to the community, want to have access to our services and our programs in order to live their lives just like everybody else. Let's allow them to do that. Let's provide the resources, the services, the programs in a way that they can use them. Accessible to and usable by, those are the key words in the regulation for doing anything related to Title II. Make sure that all your services, programs, and activities are accessible to and usable by your entire customer base, including people with disabilities. Methods of administration in the absence of a transition plan. U.S. delegation of responsibility to FHWA, recipients. See, we are recipients. We receive federal funds. You guys are sub-recipients. FHWA has delegated to division offices to watch us. And then they've also delegated to us to watch you. I don't like it either. FHWA is the designated agency for enforcement. They have the authority to make us do what the law says. How do they do that? By withholding federal funds. They can threaten to either not provide or retract federal funds if they think you're willfully non-complying. I mean, we're not talking, oh, sorry, we forgot, we got behind. They're talking about, we don't want to do it, we don't think we have to do it, we're not going to do it. Guess what? FHWA can say, okay, then you don't need our money. They don't want to do that. They want to help us comply. They don't want to make us comply. Right up until the time there's an FHWA lawsuit or complaint, a complaint through FHWA, our lawsuit through FHWA, they will help us, provide resources, hold our hands, because now they want us to comply. But if there's now a legal issue pops up, now they're on the enforcer side. They basically say, okay, we tried to tell you, you're on your own now. Now, they say that, but then the law will probably start providing resources. But still, you don't want to be on the wrong side of a legal issue with the feds. I know I don't. You don't want to be on the wrong side of a legal issue with a private party who has an attorney who wants to make some money this year. Challenges, right? Resources. Money, staff, time. Those are the basics, right? What's our schedule look like? How many people do we got available to work? How much money do we have to spend? Do we know what the regs really say? Do we understand? They're written sort of in lawyerese, but I think some lay people were also trying to be involved to make sure that it wasn't all, wherefores and heretofores and all that sort of good stuff. It's supposed to be a living document and process. Keep at it. You've got a document out there. You've got a schedule. Are you working the schedule? Are you meeting the schedule? If you are, check it off. We're doing good. We're on schedule. No, we're drifting a little bit behind schedule. Do we need to add some more resources? Do we need to apply some more, put some more people on the project? Whatever. How old is too old? Well, 1993 is right at the limit of way too old, because that was the deadline for creating your first ADA transition plan, July of 1993. If that's the only one you got, you're way behind. Now, we've accepted plans in the 2010s, in the early teens, probably okay. As long as we get assurances that that's still being worked on. That's not the, that's not the final product. How about this? TPA does not own any public rights of way. Do you?
No.
See? So why do you have to do an ADA transition plan? Because the rules say you do. No, because
we have to do one ourselves? Yeah. Well, we don't have like a dozen employees ourselves, but we're handling funds that we're passing through, allocating
there you go.
to this.
It's all about the money, isn't it? Even though they don't say that, that's sort of about the money. Where's the money coming from? Who has their fingers on it? Yeah. And it's not only about curb ramps, but that's the new hot topic. DOJ, DOT, US DOT. That's our new pet peeves. If you can't get people out of the street safely, not only inaccessible, maybe unsafe. The FHWA actually has created some new work groups, and they are working together to start creating some new resources to help people, help agencies. We're starting to look at revisions to the 2006 standards and the Section 504. They have some Q&A online on the FHWA's website. There's some ADA 504 questions and answers, and they try to keep that updated routinely. They've added to the Q&A on that DOJ technical assistant, joint TA. So that was pretty helpful. If you go online, you find the joint TA. Just underneath it is the Q&A for it. There's a lot of real-world questions like, what if I'm only removing an inch of asphalt and putting back an inch of asphalt? Is that an alteration or a maintenance? They answer the question. Believe it or not, it's actually an alteration. Even though at the same level at the end, you've milled and you refilled. That's adding or replacing asphalt. That's an alteration. And they're also starting to create some workshops in-house for their own staff so they can develop new policy and procedures to share with us recipients and sub-recipients. Any additional questions before we finish up? Are you scared? Are you ready to resign now?
guidance on how much funding you have to put each year towards upgrading facilities? Because I heard somebody say just if we touch it, we'll fix it, isn't enough. How much is enough?
There's no guidance on how much money to spend. It's whatever your resources are available to you. You make those decisions. Okay, I'm going to spend $100 a year on sidewalk curb ramp replacement. That's probably not going to cut it. But, you know, something reasonable and consistent. Reasonable that even if you have to borrow, like I said, you might have to borrow money from some other program because you've got some higher priority issues over here, maybe, possibly. So that's one of the things. It's not you as the Public Works Director or the chair of the Parks and Recs Commission, you're not going to make that decision all on your own because you're probably not determined of all your entire resources. You're basically said, okay, here's the county resources, here's your little chunk, right? You know, maybe you want to discuss with some of the other departments about, you know, what are you guys doing this year? What are we doing this year? Maybe we can share and stuff like that. Can't we all just work together, right?
You made a comment on TPA moves money. What does that mean?
I don't think that's a move, but allocates funding.
Okay, allocates
Yeah.
funding.
Right.
What
Because
does
we
that
have,
mean?
well, we have two competitive funding programs that would probably be of most interest to you all in this regard, that when you're applying for funds and you're competing against other local entities with projects, we need to know that you have a transition plan, because we're representing that we're not allowed to authorize funding for any entity that does not have one. So we're putting ourselves at risk, but we're relying on you to document. We're not saying necessarily show it to us, that's between you and FHWA and FDOT. But there has to be one in place for us to be able to authorize funding for projects. So those are competitive programs. Of course, we have every year our board adopts a priority projects list. So if we look at projects that have not already been fully funded and they prioritize those, we provide that to DOT. They consider those and the different restrictions on the funding sources available and try to, the best they can, honor that priority projects list as they form their work program, which they bring back to us and present to us generally every December. And then ultimately that gets put into the TIP that we adopt every year, which is the next 5 years. So that priority projects list is basically, typically, to oversimplify, suggesting the new 6th year. As a year falls off of the TIP every year when it's updated, and there's a new year of project funding introduced. So that may be additional phases of funding for a project that's already received partial funding. It may be brand new projects starting to get on there, but two of the programs that we have that are competitive are the local initiatives and the transportation alternatives projects. But really what we're saying applies to all of this, because if our board is authorizing funding to go to a project in your area or for you to do a project, and actually that's a distinction I'm not sure we're totally clear on. What if there's a situation where one of these entities applies and receives funds or ranks highly, let's say, in our application process, but DOT is going to do, are there distinctions based on who actually does the work? If DOT is actually going to do the work on behalf of a smaller municipality that's not black certified or for whatever reason, are there other things we haven't touched on, distinctions?
I really don't know the answer to that question. I'm not that closely tied with the LAP program. I will coordinate with them on the SCAT process, but whether the local agency is taking the money and building their own project, or whether we're building a project on their behalf, or whether they're building a project on within our right-of-way, there's lots of overlaps. I'm not sure how that really works out. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Ask Lorraine Moyle. Lorraine Moyle and Carrie Shepard will know how that works out. Lorraine Moyle is the LAP coordinator in Tallahassee, LAP administrator.
Okay, good. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Without taking an hour to explain what our role is as an agency, but basically that's what we do. We do not have money, we're simply allocating through our recommendations to DOT what projects we prioritize and what funded, and one way to make that list is through the applications, the competitive programs that we have every year where you apply for one of those two programs, local initiatives or transportation alternatives. And again, if you go to our website, palmbeachtpa.org/funding, that will just get you right to the page about funding, and from there you'll see those two programs, and you'll go to links about those two programs. And there may not be current information up there right now, but the application process will be opening probably within the next month or two for this year's cycle, and that information will be updated. So what you see now, whatever's remaining is probably left over from last year, but it'll give you an idea as to the timeline of the cycle. Sometimes that timeline is impacted by the legislative session, because when they start earlier, which I think they're scheduled to do again next spring, then we have to advance, and DOT, it works backwards for all of us, that we all have to have things submitted earlier, basically in alternating years.
Thank you.